Okay, so Dmitry, thank you very much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure.
Tell me a little bit, first of all, you're a documentary filmmaker. Tell me about how you're using storyteller tactics.
Yes, so I was looking for some way to improve my storytelling for my documentaries. I read a lot of books, and I realized that like there are no one place where I can teach myself how to do it. That was my main concern, and then I just found your product, and I was amazed. Like, oh my god, that's what I'm looking for, because everything in one place. So I want to share how we are working on documentaries and show what tactics I'm using right now.
Yeah,
Maybe you can give me
that'd be
some.
great. Yeah, because we've actually had quite a few people on the Slack channel asking about
Mm-hmm,
using storyteller tactics for film
mm-hmm.
making, whether that's either as documentary or fiction. Oh wow, okay. So you're
So
really going to town,
yeah,
right?
let me show
Talk me
you.
through what's going on here.
This is like we're using mirror map, and this
Hmm.
is a documentary we're working right now. It's called Immortality for Rich. So we're exploring this topic, like why very rich people like Bill Gates, Sam
Yeah,
Altman, and Larry Ellison, they invested huge amount of money in technologies to help them to live forever. And there
right.
are many aspects of these issues. For instance, just
Yep.
imagine who will be distributing these pills, like who will
Yeah.
survive and who will who should die. So there are a lot of
Yeah.
questions. And so first of all, we are doing research. We have all this information, but
Yep.
on the second step, we just used your framework,
Mm.
trying
Mm.
to answer what works for us, what doesn't work for us, because
Mm.
some cards doesn't work very well, but some of them
Yep.
I will show later. It looks like it has a
Right.
perfect match. So then we
Yeah.
built. We found two cards that work for us. Movie time,
Mm. Yes.
because there is a kind of the first part of the documentary will be about like where we are right now with these technologies, what is
Yep.
happening in this industry, and there are also some issues involved in this topic, because like let's imagine your beloved wherever mother is dying, and there is a pill you can buy to save her.
Mm.
Like we want to touch some emotions right at the beginning
Yep.
to have a very good story hook.
No, I think that I can completely see, and it is interestingly the emotion is the bit that often gets left out in corporate communications. A lot of my business clients who are not naturally storytellers tend to leave the emotion out. But interestingly, even when I was a journalist and making documentaries myself for the BBC,
Hmm.
sometimes we would not be explicit about the emotion. The emotion was there, but we played it down. Um, and yeah, it's really yeah. You only you think you create a scenario there about okay. Imagine your mother is ill and you can't afford the same medicine as
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos. Yeah, that's going to feel emotional. So it's very easy. You're right, and the emotions become very strong hooks. And also the other thing interesting about emotion, it is a hook, hooks us
Hmm.
into the story, but it's also a trigger, and it makes us share things with other people. If you get really cross about something, you go and tell someone. If you find something really funny, you go and tell someone. Um, if you find something really sad, you tell someone. Now you either tell them, but face to face, or you share on social media. So
Hmm.
emotion is really, really key. Interestingly, the yeah. Anyway, so carry on. Tell me. So movie time and story hooks working
Yeah.
well for
So
you. Good.
we realized that movie time card very works very good for us because there is a very clear structure.
Yep.
So we
Yep.
put just our data in all these stick notes, and
Yep.
it's helping us to write scripts. So then we have,
Great.
so emotion in this case works as a kind of hook,
Yep.
and then we just explaining the meaning of these technologies, like what technologies looks like a fake, or
Yep.
like a snail oil salesman tactics, and what is really makes sense. For instance, like blood cells. So I'm some
Mm. Mm.
very sophisticated technologies. So
Yep.
the part two, part three will be about the meaning of these technologies,
Yeah.
and about how does it work. So we're explaining
Yeah.
people a little bit about technologies. But
Yeah.
then we realize that we don't have a kind of antagonist in this story. Like we want to
Right.
increase stake a little bit. So then we found this card and we add a little bit dragon in the city to our script
Mm.
because we want to
Mm-hmm.
have antagonist. And in this
Mm.
specific case, the antagonist, like a evil of this story, is a very rich guys. Some of them are could be good, some of them could be really bad. But in the
Mm.
past, in US at least, there was a case when one guy just purchased a company who were making some I don't remember exactly, some medication from very
Mm.
rare disease, and he sold every pill like a 15,000 per refill.
Right.
So there were several cases in the past, and we realized like the dragon in this and the city is a kind of good card to complete a little bit our story, because
Yeah.
like we are the people in this city, and who is the dragon?
Yep.
The dragon
Yep.
is a very rich guy. What we want to have, we want to defend our health system with
Mm.
I don't know, some maybe rules and some maybe
Mm.
restrictions that you cannot use this immortality technologies against us. And
Mm.
that's how we decided to build this story. So like, to
Okay.
sum up, this is like a structure, and this is a kind
Yep.
of like a one I would say one angle that
Yep.
would be used in a
Well, listen, can I, whilst we're still talking about this story, can I just throw two more cards in there, which I think you might find useful?
mm-hmm,
And they are in the so in the red section where Dragon and the City comes from.
mm-hmm,
There is also okay. There's a card called Good and Evil.
mm-hmm. Let me
Okay,
open it.
which is in the red section, and Good and Evil uh, is basically the idea that there are moral conflicts at play in stories a lot of the time. And you know, when we get annoyed about a story and
Mm-hmm.
share it on, so it's in the concept section, the first column. Yes, there you go.
Yes,
That's it.
mm-hmm,
When we get annoyed about something, it's because it's offended our moral sense often, or sometimes it offends our physical sense. So on the back of the card, on the second page of the card, it says, "Well, look, there are six very common moral
mm-hmm,
conflicts."
mm-hmm,
Um, and okay, well, care versus harm so that's like bullying. But also, you could say, well, these people think now you. And if you look at just slide the page over, you see the good versus evil. If yeah, keep going across the page.
mm-hmm,
So a simple conflict story is good guys versus bad guys.
mm-hmm,
Right? That's a simple conflict story. But a more complex conflict is two things that could be good
mm-hmm,
but are in conflict. So if you
mm-hmm,
take the first of these, care versus harm, well, some of these guys, some of these doctors think they're doing good.
mm-hmm,
But on the other hand, if they spend billions of pounds saving, making billionaires immortal, they won't be spending that money on healthcare for the very
mm-hmm,
poorest. So there are two people who think they're doing the right thing. So a doctor who's working on immortality thinks he's doing the right thing.
mm-hmm,
A doctor who's trying to improve the health of the poorest people on the planet thinks that she's doing the right thing. But
mm-hmm,
their two rights are in conflict, which is also really, really interesting.
mm-hmm,
So care and harm is a good one. You could say fairness and cheating. You know, it feels like the moral thing is, hang on a second, these people are cheating death. They're
mm-hmm,
cheating the rest. The rest of us have to put up with it. So I think those two, care and harm, and fairness and cheating,
mm-hmm,
are actually quite interesting areas for conflict. And again, the interesting thing about this card is you can set up a simple conflict, good
mm-hmm,
versus evil, or you can set up a complex conflict where two good things are, and only one can win.
mm-hmm,
So it's a much so you've got so that's the first card that struck me as being interesting. The next one, as you were talking, The next card I thought, which I think is also in the red section of cards, is called the Circle of Life.
I see. I see.
Oh, it's a red concept card again, called Circle of Life. And the idea here, it's a little bit like where archetypes come from. So the idea is that everyone you meet is somewhere on this kind of circle of life, because we are all getting older, and we all start out as children. And obviously, sometimes you'll be talking to an audience and they're still children. But okay, so we start out as children, we become teenagers, we leave home, we go out into the wide world, we try and find our way, and then some of us come back from that adventure and start the next adventure, which is to become parents, and then the whole circle goes round and round and round again. And what's interesting here is part of the circle of life is getting older, and part of getting older means accepting your own mortality and death. So on the card here, it says, well, what life stage is your user at? Well, in this case, we're talking about the subject of your documentary, the person you're telling the story about. What role are they playing? Well, if you're an internet billionaire who's trying to spend billions on, well, you're obviously a kind of wise old adult. You're not a parent. You're not a child. So you're not a child or a teenager. You're sort of okay, but there's a conflict here because they're not fitting into what the circle of life tells us to do. It doesn't tell us to do. In the circle of life, we just go through life, and then but we go through these stages, and lots of us go through similar stages. And one of the stages that everyone goes through is death. And these guys, and I bet they're mostly men, are stepping out of. They're fighting against that circle of life. That's really interesting. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they're doing something fundamentally different from the rest of us, and that's really interesting. So the circle of life might be another card for you to have a look at when you're thinking about that overall kind of the overall feeling of, well, what's this story of, what's the powerful part of this story? And a powerful part of this story might be these are people who are fighting against life itself because they don't want to follow the pattern that the rest of us know is going to happen. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I didn't think about this. Yeah, I think we can use this card as a good intro. The kind of intro that.
Well, the other thing as well is, again, because we've just identified these are people who are fighting against something. They're rebelling against the circle of life in this case. So the other red concept card that's worth you taking a look at is rules, cheats, and rebels. And you can say, okay, so there's a rule in life. Right. One of the rules, well, there are lots of rules in life. One of the rules in life is you get old and die. Yep. So there's a phrase in common use in English. I can't remember who said it originally, but the quote goes, there are only two things certain in life: death and taxes.
Yeah, that's very famous.
Taxes. Okay. Yeah. So these guys they've decided they don't want to follow that rule anymore. Some of them don't pay tax either, which is obviously quite funny. But so they've decided that death is no longer the rule that they wish to follow. Okay, so there's two ways of seeing. First of all, if you tell your audience, you don't have to tell them explicitly these guys are breaking the rule, but you set it up as clear. There's a rule here. Everyone gets old, everyone dies, death and taxes. Okay, that's two things certain in life. These guys don't think so. They're determined that they're going to break that rule. Now, what the card rules, cheats, and rebels makes it clear is, as soon as you set out a rule in the story and then break it, we will keep watching or listening to your story to see what happens next, because it's a really powerful hook. So in all the stories you can ever think of, from Adam and Eve, where God says to Adam and Eve, "Don't eat the apple," right? And okay, they eat the apple. Right the way through to Peter Rabbit, where Peter Rabbit's mother says, "Don't go in Mr. McGregor's garden," and of course he does. And it's interesting, like it goes so far as to say, if you ever hear a rule in a story, someone says you mustn't do this, that rule is going to be broken in the story. Otherwise it's pointless. What on earth, it's pointless. So right, the first thing, you introduce a rule. Second thing, you'd say these guys are trying to break that rule. Third thing is, because we are humans, we live in social groups, and social groups survive because we all follow rules. Right, unwritten rules mostly. Okay. Third thing that happens then is you say, well, these guys are breaking the rules. Well, what kind of rule breakers are they? And you don't have to make the decision. You could let the audience decide, but there are two types of rule breaker. One is the rebel, who says, this rule is unfair and wrong. I'm going to break it, and I'm going to break it because it's in everyone's best interests that I break this rule. It's we're serving a higher purpose. So when Harry Potter breaks the school rules, he does it to defeat Voldemort. When Rosa Parks broke the rules about sitting in segregated buses, she did it for a higher sense of justice. Okay, so they're rebels, and they break the rules for a good reason, and they do it openly. Yep. The cheat, on the other hand, is someone who breaks the rules for selfish gain, and often they do it in secret. So somebody who robs your house is breaking the rules, but they don't go around telling everyone they've robbed your house. They're not proud of it, right? And what's interesting in the story is we want to see what happens to them, because if the rebel gets away, if the rebel is vindicated, then we all know that rule needs to change. If the cheat is punished, we all know that rule is still okay. So again, coming back to your example with people trying to make themselves immortal, they will see themselves as breaking one of life's fundamental rules, that we all die. And in doing so, they will see themselves, I guess, as rebels. They're trying to rebel against old age and death. We might see them, or other people might see them, as cheats. They're trying to cheat death. They're trying to cheat the healthcare system. They're trying to, okay. But either way, and you don't have to as the filmmaker, you don't have to say which one you think is true. But it's a great way of playing out the story by creating a rule, breaking the rule, see what happens. So that's another tactic I would say could be really useful for you. Okay, now in terms of the kind of, obviously what you're working at the moment is ideas and characters, and themes that you want to explore in the film. What about structuring the film in terms of, putting it into sections and thinking, okay, how are we going to actually structure? Because obviously a film, like a book, ends up as a linear story. That's the great thing about, by the way, the great thing about Storyteller Tactics is they're non-linear. So you can use the cards in any order you like, as you're doing on this board. That's why I think they work really well. Okay, so how have you used any cards to help you create structure?
Yes, I think that's what we have right now. So I will be glad to hear your thoughts. Like, we feel that at the beginning intro, we want to raise some emotional questions, as I said, from this card, because it's really emotional topic. Then we want to introduce some of these, let's say, devils, or maybe dragons, who are trying to change order of our city, how we lived before that.
Yep.
Then we want to explain in part two about all science technologies that like how this dragon want to change our order of life, because
Yeah.
all
Yep.
these
Yep.
technologies, they are very different. Sometimes they
Mm.
could be accessible, sometimes they are very inaccessible for many people, for many millions of people. And in part
Mm.
two, there is also one side that they're investing in some businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And we know every time when corporations and capitalism come to do something, there will be a lot of questions about money. Like,
Yep.
so we have to explain like real companies they invest in, because
Yes.
for instance Larry Ellison, he's super rich and he's investing
Mm.
in Ellison Medical Foundation, and there are
Mm.
some questions like he's investing just to save his money from taxes, or he just invest to have a new
Mm.
let's say a huge super company that will be, you know, making decisions who will be living forever and who will not be living forever. So the businesses, I mean, real companies, real big corporation, they will be playing
Mm.
a key role, like Pfizer played a role during the
Yep.
COVID.
Yes.
So they,
That's very interesting. Yes. So the companies themselves could, in your Dragon in the City, the companies themselves are could be potentially your dragons.
yeah, kind of like,
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
and
Listen, can I just ask a sort of technical question from the point of view now? Obviously, people who are watching this who don't make films
mhm.
um, might not get the detail here. But let's just try. Um, have you decided on a style in terms of? Are you going to have a narrator who is like the sort of the providing a voice but without appearing in the film, and is providing, in other words, excuse me, is going to explain ideas as the film progresses, and then we have interview clips as well? Or are you going to have a so that's a narrator, or are you going
Mhm.
to have a some sort of presenter who who gets involved in the film in some way?
My style of documentary is following. So I usually in the in the frame, I mean in
Mm,
the on the screen, but I don't want to be like more than 5% during the video. So I
mm.
usually have myself only in 5, maybe 4%, and I
Yep.
have a lot of footage to support what I'm doing. So the part of our job, we pre-select like a 100, maybe 200 footage, and to
Mm,
find the best way to explain. So it's not a voiceover totally,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
so I'm a kind of host of this
Yep.
documentary.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have a lot of footage to support every word uh,
Okay.
we are
Okay.
trying to explain.
Good. Well, listen, that's obviously that's a very tried and tested and very good, solid way of telling a story.
Hmm.
Okay. One thing that I think is interesting about this, and I don't know um, how you get into that. So one of the things, as you know, when you're making films, but this also applies to people who are writing stories.
Hmm.
Um, there's always a right. Let me just tell you a little story. When I was first starting out working at the BBC as a journalist,
Hmm.
and I would come up with ideas for stories. I was quite interested in politics back then, and so I'd come up with ideas which were about, well, similar kinds of things to what you're talking about here, social and political issues.
Hmm.
And my editors would listen and think, they would say, okay, that's
Hmm.
an interesting story, but what are you going to point a camera at? And I would go, I don't know. So, for example, you'd want to do a story about changing social attitudes towards, like, for example, single-sex marriage,
Hmm.
where social attitudes are changing. Well, what are you going to point a camera at to show changing attitudes? Well, okay, well, I don't really know. Maybe we could film a wedding. Well, okay, but whose wedding? So you suddenly well,
Hmm.
that framing of so it would what are you going to point a camera at is a really good framing question. Make yourself think visually. Now, obviously, when you're working in TV and video, you have to think visually all the time. But actually, other people who are not working in TV or video, it's a really good test question. What would I point a camera at for this part of the story that I'm writing? And if the answer is, well, nothing really, because you're writing about abstract concepts like fairness and equality, well, that's abstract, and you can't point a camera at fairness. So you have to point a camera at something else. And you
That's
have
a
to
very
point a
good
camera at
point.
somebody acting fairly or unfairly, because then we can see it. So that's quite interesting.
Let me share one example,
Yes,
maybe.
please.
So that's a very good point. So I completed several courses, and one was from Aaron Sorkin, who was a script writer for Steve Jobs movie, and so and he told a very good phrase like, "Remember that your story will be played, not read."
Yes,
And
yes, yes, yes.
then I found several good YouTubers that I really like. Became the Patreon on the Patreon platform. James Johnny,
Yep,
he's from UK, by the way,
yep.
and he told me like, so I bought the access, and I just realized that his scripts, they were written to be played. So what does it mean?
Yes.
Like, if you are reading, it's like there is the sentences is very short. Sometimes they are very emotional. Like, what is the money? What is the purpose of the money? Like blah blah blah.
Yes.
You just
Yes.
have to pronounce every sentence to realize what type of footage you want to put in this story. Otherwise,
Yeah.
if you're just reading this, it doesn't make sense.
No,
Like, it's not
you're
a book.
absolutely right. And I'm sure you're discovering this the more you make write commentary. You have to write in the way that you speak, because then it becomes a conversation with an imaginary listener. And there's a really nice little trick, by the way, if you're writing and you're struggling to write naturally, and it's not easy. But one little trick which I was told, and I think it is right, you sit down at the keyboard when you're writing the script, and you've got the laptop and the screen's there in front of you, and imagine. So your typical audience will be maybe people say 20 to 30 years old who are watching your documentaries. Yes. So you say, right, imagine there's two of them, man and a woman, sitting opposite. They're sitting just behind my laptop, looking at me. Right. So I'm going to sit and I'm going to speak to them. So I'm going to now write as if I'm speaking to them, and to actually put them on the other side of your studio in your head. Yeah. And imagine you're talking to them when you sit down to write, and that will stop you from writing clunky, long, difficult sentences, because you're then trying to get their attention with your words and go, hey, you will not believe what these guys have done in here. Right. You go into a form of language which is much, much more conversational, just by imagining that they're sitting in front of you while you're typing. So that's a nice little trick. That's not in Storyteller Tactics. That's just something that's good to do. Couple of thoughts about story structure. Okay, so you've highlighted already No Easy Way as a possible story structure. I think the tactic Pride and Fall could be quite interesting for you, because again, the attempt to achieve immortality is a little bit like the attempt in the story of Icarus. Yes, the attempt that man could fly. Well, before the Wright brothers, we couldn't. And so from the point, it's a structure card, yeah. And so from the point of view of
Just trying to
the audience, the attempt to defeat death, to become immortal, is like Icarus trying to fly trying to fly like a bird. So the audience are kind of waiting for some. If someone says, "I think I can cure death and live forever," right? Well, what you can do with that is play along the arc. So give them a chance to say how fantastic this technology is. But then if anything goes wrong, I don't know if stuff has gone wrong with this technology. I mean, clearly people still die. Then you can bring us back down again. So pride is, look how clever we are, and the fall is, oh no, you're not. And we really like that story. The audience, everyone likes that story. It's why when you go to see Titanic, yep, you know what happens at the end, but you still go and see it because you want to see it happen. In Jurassic Park, when the scientists go, "Hey, look, we can clone dinosaurs. Aren't we clever?"
Yeah,
And you
absolutely.
know that the dinosaurs are going to eat them.
And
You just
something
know
will
it.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah, because it wouldn't be a story if it didn't.
Yeah.
If they said, "Aren't we clever?" and "Oh yes, so we are," that's fine then. It's not a story. Whereas Pride and Fall is a story. So any sign you've got, any evidence you've got in your documentary so far of these technologies not working as they should, that will play into that Pride and Fall story arc. One other thing I was just thinking as you were talking um, about is, okay, are you familiar with Michael Moore's documentary style
Nope.
or Louis Theroux?
Nope.
Okay, these are both presenters who immerse themselves in a particular world. So
Mm-hmm.
they go into they immerse themselves into the world they're studying, and then they come out the other side, but the journey has kind of changed them a bit, or they've learned something. And it might be it would be really interesting. So, for example, if you're I don't know whereabouts are you based, Dmitry?
I'm in Texas.
Okay, so is it possible, for example, for you to walk in off the street to some private health care clinic?
Mm-hmm.
And all right, they're not going to make you live forever because that would be a bit ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they're going to show you the world that is open to you if you had lots of money,
Mm-hmm.
because that is a way
Mm-hmm.
of rather than you being a kind of the voice of the script and a popping up occasionally on screen, but actually just you've stepped right back, but you're giving us the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're giving us all these different facts about all these different people, and you're providing the overview, which is good. That's a good narrator's. That's the job of the narrator, is to provide the overview. But another way to do it is to go into the picture a bit yourself. And so if you, for example, you go into Austin and Texas and there's a clinic there, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if I'm making this up, but there's a clinic there which says, come in off the street, we'll give you a consultation and we'll tell you how much it'll cost you to live to 100. And you go, right, well, I'm going to go and do it and film it. And the reason I'm going to do it is I want to see how it feels to be in that place. And maybe when I come out of that place, 'cause I'm going to go
Mm-hmm.
in with an open mind, maybe I'll come out and I'll feel a bit different about age and aging and death because I've been sitting there in a consultation room with somebody telling me, right, and someone pointing out all these things they can do. So maybe that will feel different for you, the narrator, by going into that world, yeah, firsthand. So there's a couple of cards that be if you're able to go down that route, you may think it's not right for you, but if you're able to go down that route, there's a couple of cards that I think might be interesting to look at. One is on it's in the it's in the orange section marked
Mm-hmm.
explore. It's abstractions, and the reason why it's basically abstractions. The tactic is about, and I'll relate it to your film in a second. But abstractions is about the fact that we we know more than we can say. Yeah, we experience, we understand much more than we ever actually put into words. And how do we know it? Well, because we live it,
Mm-hmm.
we act it, we follow other people. We're constantly mimicking people around us and copying what they do, imitating. We get involved in little rituals, and then sometimes we verbalize it, we tell stories, and then sometimes we give people an opinion about something, right? Well, the opinion is the highest level of abstraction. Story is the next level down, but all the other things, the living and imitating and acting, all those physical things are really quite deep. And that's where you pick up an awful lot of wisdom by doing stuff. And so by going from if you're the narrator with the overview, that's quite abstract because you've gone up and up and up and up these different. You're giving us the top-down view, but if you can find a way of getting into the story in the way that you are acting out something, you're going into a clinic and talking to somebody and having your blood pressure taken and your fat levels measured, and all this, you're actually going into a situation where someone's saying to you, hey, here are all the things we can do to make you live to 100. Dmitry, it sounds like a really fascinating project. So the last point I was making about abstraction, I suppose, is about, if you're the narrator who looks down from above and assembles the clips and assembles the pictures and presents the script, in a way you are quite abstracted. It'd be interesting to know, is there a way that you can immerse yourself in some way you can physically do something connected with the story? I'm not quite sure how you do something connected with immortality, but there's all sorts of things out there, even at a low budget level. Yes, not the Jeff Bezos level, but maybe there's something at a walking off the street level that you can try and see how that feels and add something else to the story. Okay, that's my first thought on that. Now, I wanted to just talk to you about timeline. And there's something interesting in that card, the 5 T's, about playing with setting out a timeline, but then playing with the timeline. And the simplest timeline of all, as you know, is beginning, middle, and end, which is, well, this happened, this was the situation, then this happened, and then as a result of that, okay. So that's a simple timeline. But when you're talking about there are moments in a story of maximum tension. That's one of the T's, but also temptation and turning points. So these are also timeline. Yep, that's basic. Turning points, tension, and temptations. These are all really interesting points in a film. And sometimes you can jump around a timeline. And lots of films do this. So you can jump around. So, for example, if you're watching a James Bond film, every Bond film starts in the same way, and it starts with a fight. And you don't know who Bond is fighting or why. It doesn't really matter. You just start straight in the action. It's the same with, if you remember, the opening episode of Breaking Bad, the very first episode. There's a guy in the desert driving a van with a gas mask, with being chased by people with guns, and you've no idea who he is. And then the next scene, he's teaching in a classroom.
Yeah, I
and you think,
remember.
okay, how on earth did he get from there to there? Well, that's playing with the timeline and starting not at the beginning. Here's a man teaching in a classroom, yeah, but starting near the end. Here's a guy being chased by drug dealers. Okay, so you start in the greatest tension. So you can set out a kind of timeline, but you don't have to stick to it. It doesn't have to be chronological. You don't have to say back in 1950, whatever, Walt Disney was fascinated by him. You don't have to do the history and then bring yourself up to date. You can jump all over the place. You could even start in the future and say, in 30 years' time, some people are going to live forever, they think. Okay, so you can even start in the future. That's up to you. You start where you think it's most dramatic. Okay, so that's one point about using 5 T's to play with your timeline and think, how do I grab people's attention in the first, as you know, in YouTube, you've got to get them in the first 90 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's very important.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, the other thing I think would be interesting for you to reflect on, but also because this applies to filmmakers, but it also applies to anybody who's making a presentation of any kind at work. So they're making a visual communication, even if they're just using a PowerPoint, never mind making a video. And this is the card Show and Tell, which is one of the pink style cards. And Show and Tell is basically about controlling our attention. So we have eyes and ears. You can show us something visual
Mm-hmm.
whilst telling us something audible. Okay, show and tell. And what I was taught as a journalist, TV journalist, was
Mm-hmm.
if you show somebody something and tell them exactly the same thing at the same time, it starts to get quite boring quite quickly. So you say, here is the man walking down the street. He's walking quite quickly because he's in a hurry. He's going to go into that shop in a second. No, that's what the video is doing. You don't need to show and tell the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you can't go, well, here's a man walking down the street. 45 years ago, the German government did this, this, and this, and then the Americans tried to do this, and you're still seeing the same guy walking down the street. And you're thinking, hang on a second, you're showing us one thing and telling us something completely different. What on earth is going on?
Yeah, it's
Well,
confusion.
confusing. So what you do in a film, but what you also do in a presentation is, yeah, you show something and then you can diverge away from what you tell, but you have to come back to it. Maybe you change the image, or maybe you refer back to the image. So you say things in a script, little things like, as you can see here, right? When you say that, you peg our attention back onto the image. This is why it looks like a washing line with washing hanging off the line. And you do that again and again and again and again. And every time you bring in a new unusual image, you talk about the new and unusual image. Every time you show us something new, you have to tell us what we're seeing. Otherwise, we're going, what the hell is this? And this applies, as I say, it applies in video and it applies in any form of visual presentation, that you've got to get this balance right. Too much show and tell together is boring. Show
Mhm.
and tell diverging too long is confusing. So you just do the washing line and keep
Mhm.
pegging back. Now, this is a really good, this is a great tip for video. Obviously, there's only so many seconds in a video where you can get this wrong before people start to get confused. But it also, as I say, applies to kind of visual presentations. And just my last thought about the documentary that you're making. Um, do you find yourself using a lot of archive and public access news footage and that kind of thing? So if you're talking about Jeff Bezos, clearly you're not going and interviewing Jeff Bezos personally. You're using archive
Absolutely. Yeah.
footage, yes? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So my style of documentary, it's I mean, I want to make something for Netflix, but at this
Yep.
moment, I'm using two types of footages. So first of all, we do animation in a
Yes.
After
Uh-huh.
Effects. So if I cannot explain something, I
Yeah.
just want to make animation, or we are
Yep.
using
Very good.
some footages from wherever, YouTube and
Yep.
blah blah
Yep.
blah, and we can use it because of how it's called. Yeah, so if we are showing something and telling about this, it's not a copyright.
Got it. Yep. Understood. So it's critical. You're making a critical point. Therefore, you can use it. Okay. So you know your business. You know exactly how not to get caught on
But you are
copyright.
telling, I absolutely agree with you. There is a second type of documentaries that you see on Netflix, and they interviewing people. They have
Mm.
they have access to the archives of
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, yes. Well, there is that. So again, um, it's that question of how much can you kind of, yeah, you can show people an awful lot. Let's say if you're the narrator looking down on the big picture, you can show us an awful lot and tell us an awful lot. And then it's really a question of making sure that the images you're using
Mm-hmm.
work well with the words you're using. And as I say, little things in the script help us focus back on the pictures. So little things like, here you can see, yeah, on the left-hand side of the screen, there is. So little things like that, just where the words focus us back on the picture,
Mm-hmm.
are really, really, really helpful. Not all the time, because it would be annoying, but
Mm-hmm.
every now and then it helps us connect back to what we're seeing. The great thing about you appearing on camera, which I know you do sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
is that when you appear on camera, the show and tell are working together really well
Mm-hmm.
because we're looking at you and you're telling us something. So that's why it's good to appear in the studio on the mic, on the camera, because the show and tell are working completely together then, in a way that, and also humans are mostly quite curious. If someone's telling us something, we want to know who it is who's telling us.
Mm-hmm.
So it is good to appear. Having said that, it's if you go down the route eventually into interviewing and interviewing contributors as well as narrating and having pictures, but interviewing contributors, again, it's really a nice little trick you can do if you're out with a camera, mobile phone, whatever it is you're using, and you're interviewing a contributor. Here's something I've discovered. If you sit somebody down in a chair in their office or at the workplace or wherever it is, you point a camera at them and you ask them questions, they go really quite stiff. You might have noticed this. They sort of they get really quite tense because it's like an interrogation.
Yes.
Okay. The best way to relax people, and sometimes that's all you can get. So if you sit somebody down in front of a Zoom screen, that's pretty much all you're going to get is that sort of tension. Okay. If you can get them to show you something that they're talking about, they relax. So back to show and tell. So if you say, look, tell me about your clinic where you inject people with monkey hormones to make them look younger. Well, I'm going to tell you about my clinic, right? If you say, look, can you show me? Okay, take me around the clinic. Show me what the drugs look like. Okay, and where do you inject people? Oh, in the four. Okay, and you actually show me the thing you're talking about whilst you're talking about it. People relax, and they speak more naturally. And again, it's because, and the viewer likes it too, because the show and tell are working nicely together. You know, the person is showing me something and telling me all about it too. So that's a really nice little trick. And again, it kind of comes down to this thing about getting the show and tell right. And it should be, you know, in good filmmaking is more show, less tell. Yeah. Okay, Eddie, listen, that's been really, really interesting, Dmitry. Thank you so much for sharing I love your Miro board, and thank you so much for sharing that with me. Anything else you want to ask about using Storyteller Tactics?
May I add one point to someone who will do the same, maybe just that what I realized that there are three types of documentaries, like a very professional Netflix style with 10
Yes.
people interviewing other person, and like that's a skill. And
Yep.
I watched some course on masterclass, and the person who was interviewing a soldier from Vietnam War, he wasn't able to get his emotion. It was really hard to break the wall of emotions.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he asked a lot of, as you said, a lot of questions all around the topic. And then in one moment, this senior man, he became open. He opened his emotions and shared these very difficult stories. So I
Right.
realized this is like a one style of documentary. Another style of documentary that I found very helpful, that's what James Jani do, and that's what I think I'm very close to his style.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
kind of like, I just want to show you like a very very quick
Yeah. Please. Yep.
seconds of my face, and the rest is just animation. So that's me in the childhood. I'm telling this story. I'm showing all these guys who are
Yeah.
trying to steal your money with their online
So
courses.
so this is basically you're gathering visual clips to make a
Absolutely.
series of points.
Like a
Yep.
200, 300 visual clips, and it's a very time
Yeah.
work, but
Yep.
it makes like a real story. And
Yeah.
so it's a
Yep.
second type. But I realized that there is a one more type. There is a creator, Johnny Harris, if I'm not wrong. He has a very casual style of documentaries, because it's also documentaries, but he's telling the story like he's your friend, like he's telling
Yeah.
a story about the milk. and like
Yeah.
nothing fancy, not like a huge expensive cameras, but the story is
Yep.
so engaging because it's like your friend telling you the story. So it's a third
Yeah.
part, third time.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe it will be very helpful for someone
Mm.
who is doing the
Hmm.
same.
Well, listen, it's very interesting, and if you, I'm sure someone like Johnny Harris. I mean, you know, the filmmakers are often very generous with their time,
Yeah.
and so if you follow him on on YouTube or LinkedIn and ask him his advice, how did you get started in this particular style? See, that's a more much. This is what I was saying to you about it being more immersive. You're putting yourself into the story. Now, obviously, he's gone a bit further. He's kind of doing almost like comedic, like he's being like a funny presenter, which
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, real skill. But there are other, you know, so it's interesting to listen to people like that about how they develop their style. And this is the great thing about, as I say, about um, a lot of things on YouTube. People are willing to share that.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the other thing as well is you find a style you like, you know you can do it, you start getting success, you develop that more and more and more. Um, and then um, yeah, and then it's a question of, okay, well, what's the next step out of your comfort zone? So if it's going from kind of assembling 200 clips and putting them into a really coherent story, that's no small thing. That's a real achievement. Well, that's okay. Well, you then think to yourself, well, what for me is the next step? Um, and is it interviewing people? Is
Yeah.
it going to be, in which case, in that, you know, coming back to storyteller tactics, if it's interviewing people, just like that Vietnam veteran you talked about, it's hard to get people to open up. And things like in the storyteller pack, cards like there's a card called story listening, which is about listening to experts.
Mm-hmm.
There's also one called storyish conversations, which is about talking to anybody um, about their experience and their world. The last thing I'll just say, just to kind of to wrap up, which I think is really interesting from you as a documentary maker, and it's to think about it in these terms. Like I said before, if you interview somebody and you point a camera at them and they kind of go all kind of rigid, um, and I said before, we were talking about abstractions. All of us know a lot more than we can put into words
Mm-hmm.
because we've experienced so much in our lives, right? And that experience is in us, but it's very hard to put into words. So if you actually do find yourself interviewing people and you point a camera at them and you say, "Tell me why did you vote Republican, or why did you vote for the Green Party, or whatever it is, you know, or why do you think that?" I think most people don't really know,
Mm-hmm.
not in a way that they can put into three sentences in a very intelligent way. So they just give you a bit of a cliche, or they give you something they've heard someone else say, or they avoid the question, or they don't. Yeah, okay. So it's much better to get them into, okay, tell me about a time when, yeah, tell me about a moment when, tell me about a time you felt this, tell me about a time you saw this, tell me about a time you know, take it away from the why do you think this? Because nobody really knows why they think stuff. Or they're not,
Mm-hmm.
you know, take it into tell me about a time when. And that's getting people telling you stories. And most people, if they think you're being honest with them, if they think you're not trying to stitch them up,
Mm-hmm.
most people will talk to you. Especially if you say, here's the thing, you say to them, okay, this is your chance to give your side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very powerful because, you know, most people think they deserve a voice. And you as the interviewer are giving them a voice.
It
So yeah.
depends on topics, to be honest.
Mm.
Because I'm right now also working with one of my team on FTX story. It's like the biggest
Yes.
crypto
Yep.
fail in the world. We have a crazy mind map with his childhood, Sam Beckman, with all
Mm.
his inner circle. Like it's a
Mm.
crazy story. Just trust me.
Yep.
But the
Yep.
problem that people like we reach some people on what is the platform, Reddit, on Reddit
Yep.
platform, and
Yep.
ask
Yep.
like, did you lose money on FTX? They said yes, we lost.
Mm.
Like, can you share your story? Like, what do you feel? Like,
Mm.
they say, no,
Mm.
no, we feel like we will be stupid. Like that's the
Mm.
problem with some
Yeah, yeah.
investment topics, that people just took the money, put in the some kind of BS, and they
Yes.
right now they don't want to share how stupid they are.
Yeah. Listen, that's completely understandable. And you're, as filmmakers, a factual filmmaker, you always have the option of giving people the chance to be anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and the advantage of that is they can speak more freely about things that are embarrassing. The drawback, the disadvantage of that is that we all know what happens on the internet with anonymous comments. People say
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of rubbish because
Yes.
they're not going to be held accountable for what they've said. So so the viewer, the person watching, gives less value to something that comes from somebody who's anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a problem.
Yeah.
So this is why it is really important, as much as you can, to get people to be themselves, to be open about who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, in some cases, you can't do that. If you were talking to, oh, I don't know, a political dissident from China or
Mm-hmm.
Iran, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way that person can be publicly identified. Um, so you got to make allowances and good judgment calls. I don't know if you're aware of it, but if you do go a bit further down this route into interviewing people and developing into those kind of Netflix areas of documentary, there is a very good resource available to you about the ethics of filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
The BBC, who've been doing this for over 100 years now,
Mm-hmm.
have something they call producer guidelines, which are basically the guidelines that they give their own producers
Mm-hmm.
about how to treat people fairly in interviews, how to, yeah, how to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
And those guidelines are available for free for anyone to read.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, so if you just Google BBC producer guidelines, you can
Mm-hmm.
get them all. Now, half of them don't apply to you, right? But some of them do, and you don't have to follow them. You don't work for the BBC, but you know, and they're not strict rules. They're just the guidelines. So it's worth having a look at. There's an awful lot of wisdom has gone into writing them, yeah, because the people who've written them have been working in broadcast media now for, in some cases, 30 years. So there's an awful lot of experience in those guidelines. Okay. Dmitry, it's been really great talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time,
Oh, it was a
and
pleasure
thank
for
you,
me.
thank you for showing me through your kind of your working process of how you're using the tactics. It's really good. Thank you.
I just have one question about
Yes, go on.
cards that
Mm,
wasn't very clear for me when I
mm.
purchased. Should I, when I'm writing the story, should I use uh like my first story was like, should I use every like one card from this column, one from,
Yeah.
so this was my question. Then I realized that it's impossible. It will be a mess.
Yes, it is probably impossible. It's look, what we've realized, or what I mean, when I was writing Storyteller Tactics, I knew
Uh-huh.
this was the case. Um, it's impossible to come up with a single system
Mm-hmm.
for everybody because every customer is slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'd been making a deck of cards for documentary filmmakers,
Mm-hmm.
yep, everyone's slightly different. So what you've got there, how we divided the cards into the different categories.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, some of it's some of them could have gone in one or another, or sometimes in several. Um, we wrote 85. I wrote 85 cards and then left 30 out, and
Mm-hmm.
just picked what I thought were the best 55.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's not a perfect system by any means. One of the things I wish I'd done differently, we came up with what we called story recipes
Mm-hmm.
because they were based on something in workshop tactics, which also used recipes. And I don't think that's the right metaphor. They're not really recipes. So the story recipes are more like a kind of like a, so taking one, I don't know, like, let's see, what could you be using? Stories that convince, there's a recipe card.
Mm-hmm.
And on the back, there are 5 different tactics. 3 is the magic number. That's funny. Data detectives. Trust me, I'm an expert. Hero and guide. And it looks like you're meant to follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you'll have a story. It's not really like that. You can have a little bit of 1, and then some of 3, and then maybe a bit of 4. And then you go, oh, okay, that's it. I've got everything I need now. I've got my story. So, yeah, it's
that's what
I
realized. Yeah.
Trying to create a system. It's very difficult, and we it's not 100% there, and this is why it's a box of cards, not a book, because if it's a box of cards, you can move them around, and a little bit of that one, and then a little bit of that one, and then lots of this one, and whereas if it's a book, you're going through the book page by page in the certain order, whereas with the cards, you can spread them out and do them in whichever order you like, and as much of one and as little as the other. And I'm sorry, that's not that's not necessarily the most useful answer, but it is the true answer.
Yeah, it's amazing what you did. Yeah, because as I said, I read a lot of different books, and every time, like this famous book about the cat.
Save the Cat. I love that
Save
one.
the Cat. Yeah, like you are in this book, but you understand. Okay, it works for big movies. It doesn't work for documentaries. Like another book I'm reading right now, it also works for TEDx speeches, but it doesn't. It doesn't work for. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because
it's hard. It's impossible to write. It's impossible to write something that works for everyone. And yeah, but I wish I'd called them. I wish I'd called them buffet cards instead of recipe cards. I really do, because the recipe is do this, 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 and this, and you'll get a cake. And it doesn't work like that. But that's my mistake.
Thank you for your job. You did amazing.